morning, everyone. I'm Courtney Johnson with the Purchasing Division. Welcome to today's session on doing business with West Virginia, presented by Technical Services Manager Mark Totten and Senior Buyer David Pauline. It's scheduled to last until 11:30. The PowerPoint was emailed yesterday, and I think you got a follow-up this morning. So you can print that out to follow along or just follow along on the screen. We will be answering questions throughout today's presentation. So please go ahead when you think of something and put your question in the chat window and send to the host. And also, I neglected to mention that we also have Vendor Registration Coordinator Tara Oliver here with us today. But let's go ahead and get started with Mark Totten.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Mark Totten, as Courtney said, and I genuinely want to thank everybody for taking time out of your day and joining us this morning. I'm here with Tara Oliver, our Vendor Registration Coordinator, and she and I are going to take you through some of the opportunities that are available to your business entities in regard to the state's competitive bid process, as well as how to get your business entity eligible to receive contracts from the state of West Virginia. So what I want you to be able to leave here with is a little bit of information about why the state buys from the private sector in the first place and what strategies within those needs are going to best fit your business model without you having to take, huge chunks of your day in order to compete and research. We're also going to talk about how you can learn what the state is trying to buy. It doesn't, there's not much you can do in regard to offering your products if you don't know what we need. And since I know you're not in business to learn about West Virginia procurement processes or, retake a civics class, we're going to talk about some different ways that will more easily let you become aware of what state of West Virginia bidding opportunities. You may make the decision not to compete for everyone, but you don't have the freedom to make that decision if you don't have the information in hand. So there's things like email alerts and information on the purchasing website, wvpurchasing.gov, that will keep you in the loop with those opportunities. As I mentioned, Tara Oliver is going to talk about specifics when the time comes for your business, how you would become eligible to actually get a state contract. And Tara and I administer two different programs at the Purchasing Division, the Vendor Registration Program, as well as the state's Small Women and Minority-Owned Business Certification Program. We're going to talk about both of those. We'll talk mostly about vendor registration, but we'll also talk a little bit about Swam and the opportunities that exist for you there. Now, once Tara and I turn the presentation over to Senior Buyer David Pauline, he's going to go into the nitty-gritty with the different methods that the state of West Virginia uses to procure the goods and services it needs. At the end of the day, the way in which you, the vendors, would respond to a solicitation has a lot to do with the different solicitation types. So David is going to give you a good specific overview about how our different procurement methods impact what you would need to do in order to compete. And he's also going to go into some steps regarding resolution of vendor issues between the private sector and the state of West Virginia. So starting some of the information that we're going to provide for you today, why does the state of West Virginia, with a significant amount of resources and 20-some thousand employees, need goods and services from the private sector in the first place? And the answer to that is, in a lot of cases, there are goods and services that we cannot manufacture internally, or if we did, it would not be cost effective if we set up the mechanisms in order to do so. So in cases like that, every agency in the 55 counties at some point are going to need something from the private sector. Now, in addition, because of the vast quantities of commodities and services that the state agencies need in order to fulfill their missions, the state has advantage by using our bulk buying power and harnessing that bulk buying power to procure the goods and services we need at the lowest possible prices. Now, another situation where the state may need to go to the private sector are emergency declared situations, which could result from anything from storm damage to, acts of God. And of course, no agency, wants to be in an emergency situation, but where life and property is at risk, an agency may be authorized to solicit immediate services from a vendor in order to help resolve the situation. We'll talk a little bit more about, how you would become aware of that later on. So the biggest, I'm not going to go deeply into the nitty-gritty of the procurement process. However, there is one dollar value that I want to point out as being the most significant threshold that impacts how you, the vendor, would interact with the state in the competitive bid process. And that is the $50,000 threshold. What that threshold signifies is whether or not any of our state agencies would be administering a procurement on their own, or if my office, the purchasing division, would be administering that procurement for the agency on their behalf. Something expected to be under 50,000 would be the agency have the authority to procure that good or service under their own delegated authority. When something's expected to be over 50,000, that is when my office is administering that solicitation on their behalf. The biggest difference in regard to your actions are if something is being procured on agency delegated authority, you would send your bid directly to that agency. Something is being administered by my office, the purchasing division, then your response to that solicitation would come directly to my office.
We do have a question, and repeat my question because I can't.
Okay, we've got a question here.
Is the 50,000 threshold a one-time purchase or life of a contract threshold?
That's a very good question. The $50,000 threshold is in regard to bidding. So the threshold, and David Pauling will correct me if I'm wrong, the $50,000 threshold is per solicitation. So in other words, solicitation, so that's per individual project that's being bid out. Now, when you think about, as a vendor, this over or under 50,000 threshold, you may be already thinking about your own average transaction amount. And you may be thinking, well, anything I sell to the state, per transaction is probably going to be under $50,000. And that is just fine because you can make just as much money with multiple $50,000 or under contracts than, a single one over. Now, there's a lot of opportunities for you, and I'll go into a little bit more detail about when you are operating and competing in that under $50,000 world, you have the opportunity to market your business directly to the state agencies in the 55 counties for what they need. And in order to make that a little bit easier for you, so you don't just have to, knock on doors or, call numbers randomly, we have a list of state agency employees that we call procurement officers listed on our website at that link you see in the left column. And what the designated procurement officers are responsible for are procuring the needs for their agency, procuring their agency's need on their behalf. So those are the people responsible for purchasing in each agency. And the list on our website has over 100 agencies listed. Now, also on the Purchasing Division website are some resources that will help you if you are new to competing for business with the state of West Virginia. But I did want to hit those points on the significance of that threshold. Now, continuing a little bit in the under $50,000 world, because a lot of vendors, that's the dollar area where their businesses' transactions are going to fall. To make the competitive bid process easier for you, there are thresholds within that under $50,000 that require different things from you, the vendor. Now, in the $0 to $5,000 world, an agency does not even have to solicit bids for those low dollar transactions. So in other words, if an agency needs something under $5,000, they can call your business directly and get the necessary information to move forward with that procurement. Now, in the over $5,000 to $20,000 world, agencies still have a lot of flexibility to get what they need, but in that threshold, they do need 3 verbal bids from vendors, which is still very low stress, very low time investment from your perspective. And in the over $20,000 to $50,000 world, agencies still have a lot of authoritative freedom, but they would need your bid in that threshold to be in writing. And then, as I mentioned, over $50,000 is administered by the Purchasing Division. So what these 3 areas in the under $50,000 world highlight for you is a more detailed expectation that you can have going into business with the state of West Virginia, especially if you're already thinking about what your business entity's average transaction with a customer would be. So we've laid some groundwork in regard to how the state of West Virginia purchases from the private sector and some of the basic requirements that agencies would need when they go forward asking for your help. And hopefully you've seen, especially by the dollar thresholds, that in order to make an offer to a state agency for something, make a price offer, in some cases there's not a lot required from you. But to go into some more detail, I've outlined 3 different strategies for you to have in mind when you're comparing against your typical way of doing business that would give you doorways into the state of West Virginia solicitation process. Now, these strategies are by no means the only way that you might get a state contract someday, but these are just common avenues that I've seen vendors take advantage of in the years I've been with Purchasing Division. So I've outlined these 3 strategies for you. The first strategy revolves around the simple fact of you learning what the state of West Virginia agencies are trying to buy at any given time. And the most important thing for you to be aware of in that regard is a public publication called the West Virginia Purchasing Bulletin. And some of you may already be aware of the Purchasing Bulletin, but for those of you who are not, it is where most state agencies advertise what they need to the private sector. And the Purchasing Bulletin lives on a website called wvoasis.gov inside something called the Vendor Self-Service Portal. And the Vendor Self-Service Portal is your doorway into a lot of information revolving around state procurement. Now, in order for you to read the West Virginia Purchasing Bulletin, you don't even have to create a username. You don't need a password. There's not a firewall involved. You can just go to that vendor self-service portal and read it. Now, if you do want to go into a little bit more detail, you can create a user ID for your company to log into the vendor self-service portal. There's a lot of advantages to doing that I am going to go into detail about and show you, the dashboard that you would have at your disposal. And when you do that, you are assigned a WV Oasis vendor number. And the gist of creating a user ID for your company in this system is so you can save the information, and the details about your company, and then respond to solicitations online if you chose to do so. Now, the West Virginia Purchasing Bulletin that has just such a wide-ranging list of needs from all of our state agencies in the 55 counties should include solicitations expected to exceed the $20,000 threshold. But if any agency can publish a need in the purchasing bulletin, and even though some might be under the $20,000 range, an agency may decide to advertise it in the bulletin to either increase competition or because what they need from the private sector is somewhat unique, or both. Now, one point I want to emphasize for the vendor community at this stage is that you do not have to register your business with any state agency in order to respond to a solicitation in the West Virginia Purchasing Bulletin. We're going to talk about just a few state requirements to receive a contract in the course of this presentation this morning. However, I really want to emphasize there's no red tape, there's no fees. When you're just at the stage where you're responding to an advertised solicitation in the bulletin. And it would not be in the state's best interest if we put up a lot of barriers for you just to respond to an advertisement. We want to encourage competition, not discourage it. Now, the screenshot that you see in front of you now shows at a high level what the West Virginia Purchasing Bulletin looks like. And hopefully it's displaying on your screen well enough. But you can see the first thing you see when you open the bulletin is a list of projects that are currently out for bid with our agencies. And you see each line has a short description of the project, what agency has it out for bid, who the procurement officer is administering that solicitation, and how many days are left to respond. Now you see a respond button on that rightmost column, and I'll go into some detail about it. But this gives you very quickly a glance at everything the state needs at any given time. Now, another thing I'll mention is each of these projects out for bid has a project number, so to speak, or a solicitation number. And that solicitation number has a prefix on it, such as ARFQ, CRFP, etc. And David's going to go into detail about those procurement types. But while I've got this on your screen, I want you to take note of that prefix that begins with either an A or a C. The A means it's being administered at the agency level and is expected to be under 50,000. The C at the beginning of the prefix means it's expected to be over 50,000 and is being administered by my agency. Now, at this point, you're just trying to see if there's something you can provide. But since between those projects, you send your bid to different places, I wanted you to take note that from the beginning, you can see who is advertising that solicitation, purchasing or the agency. Now, you likely do not have time to read through the entire bulletin because that's not what you're in business to do, but you can search the bulletin by keyword to get something specific to your business to show up without having to scroll through pages of opportunities. Now, a recommendation I want to make about searching by keyword, this system is not as instinctive as what we're used to with Google, for example. And I encourage you to keep your search terms as short as possible. And you can see in the example here that I have just put in criteria as simple as building maintenance and phone system. And the other thing that I want to emphasize, and this gets a little bit more technical than I would like, but it's important for you to know. When you search building maintenance, for example, or phone system, I've put asterisks around all the words, and that's what we call wildcards. And what that's going to do is cast a wider net for you so you don't miss a solicitation opportunity that may be applicable for your business. The reason is, let's take phone system, for example. You're searching phone system, but maybe that project is described in the bulletin as phone and fax system. Well, you don't want to exclude yourself from seeing an opportunity to provide a phone and fax system, but those wildcards will compensate for any words that might be in between your search terms. So those asterisks, those wildcards are going to let you best search the bulletin. And quickly here, if you decide to make a user ID for the West Virginia Purchasing Bulletin, you can save your company's information so you don't have to enter it every time you want to respond to a state project. And creating a login ID is what's going to allow you to respond electronically if you chose to do so. Because, you know, obviously you wouldn't be able to respond electronically if there wasn't, you know, a login ID and relevant vendor information, so we would know who the response is from. When you set up those user IDs for your company, I really encourage you to do so with an email address that multiple people will check, or at the very least, create multiple user IDs so several people at the company can have access to checking for these opportunities.
You have a question, and it might be one best answered by David. What is the best way to approach an agency with a service they don't realize they need?
Okay, the question, what is the best way to approach an agency with an offer of service they don't know they need? First, let me say I admire your proactiveness and that go-getting attitude. I'm actually going, that kind of speaks to my second strategy that I'll talk about. And then when David takes over, I'll let him provide any input that he may want to. So if you don't mind, I'm going to kind of save that question for my second strategy, because that's a very good question, and I like where you are with that. And I think I might be able to answer that here in a few slides. Now, if you choose to create a user ID in vendor self-service, that does not register you with any state agency, like the Secretary of State or the Purchasing Division. It's just going to create a user ID for your company and let you fill in your information. I just want to make you aware of that. And any state registrations, you know, if you need to go that far, would still need to be done independently. In regard to the purchasing's vendor registration program, which is not required until you are about to receive a contract or an order from a state agency, there's two things that we would need from you, both of which can be provided online. I think the Purchasing Division's registration program is the only agency registration that can be completed through the vendor self-service portal at wvoasis.gov. Now let me tell you about something else, probably the most relevant thing for you at this stage that is available in the vendor self-service portal. And I've got two screenshots here taken from the dashboard that you would have available to your company for free if you set up an account in VSS. You know, the screenshot on the left just shows your basic information that appears after you log in. But the screenshot on the right is what I especially want to highlight, because it's going to be one of the most time-saving tools for you when it comes to learning what the state agencies are trying to buy. We've talked about the bulletin, we've talked about its list of projects, we've even talked about how to search by specific keywords. But, as I said at the beginning, you probably don't have time in a normal week to read the bulletin regularly, or, at least not every week. So I want to go into detail about email alerts that are possible in the system based on commodity codes that classify what you're in business to do. And a commodity code is basically a classification system that assigns a number to everything on earth that can be manufactured and purchased. You can look up commodity codes related to your business and enter them in your vendor profile in the VSS portal. And you would do that by going to Edit My Account and clicking the highlighted Commodities tab on that right screenshot. And when you're in the commodity section of your vendor portal, you can just say Add Commodity Code, and then add and save all those numbers that describe what it is you're in business to do. Now, what that's going to do in regard to email alerts is when an opportunity gets published by the state, the procurement officer is going to assign a commodity code to that solicitation. When the system sees vendors that have signed up for that commodity code and you have an email address on file, when the stars align, you should get an email alert saying, hey, such and such agency just put a project out for bid that is classified as a commodity code that you've indicated you can provide. You might want to go take a look at it. And again, this strategy is just about you becoming aware of the opportunities so you can make the decision to pursue them further. But again, you'll never know what you can pursue if you don't know what's out there in the first place. And these email-based commodity codes alerts are just a second hand when you can't read the bulletin every day to help you become aware of what we're trying to buy. Now, if you click, in the first bulletin screenshot I showed you showed a list of projects by one line description, but that is by far not all the information you would have to go on when you are bidding. If you click on a project number, you're taken to a more detailed screen about that project, which includes attachments about that project. The terms and conditions, the specs, maybe a list of part numbers, architectural diagrams, everything that you would need to know in order to craft your response and price for that advertisement. So all these attachments are downloadable and reviewable by you. So there should be no question as to what the state agency needs the private sector to supply. And again, here you can see the general information about this specific solicitation opportunity, the agency and procurement officer administering it, when the solicitation response would be due by, which is a hard deadline. So there's a lot of information. If you see something that you might be able to do for the state, there's a lot of information here about its specifics. Now, I alluded to these commodity codes, but I didn't say where they come from. The state of West Virginia uses the United Nations Standard Products and Service Code system in order to classify our goods and services. And that's the UN Commodity Code Library is a global classification system. There's several different sets of commodity codes in the world, but this is the set that the state of West Virginia system has programmed into the system. So if you need to look up what commodity codes describe what you're in business to do, you can go to the unspsc.org website, put in a description of what you do by keyword, and then take those numbers over to your account in the vendor self-service portal, click Add Commodity, and you can put in not just one, but multiple commodity codes to describe your business. And it's advantageous to you to use multiple commodity codes to describe what it is you can provide, because not only are you likely in business to do several things, but there may be several possible commodity codes that a state agency procurement officer would use when they put that solicitation out for bid. So this second strategy that I'll go into, and rest assured, the first strategy is the longest, so it won't take me as long to get through these others. But this second strategy should describe the answer to the question we had a few moments ago. And the second strategy revolves around marketing yourself to the state of West Virginia's agencies. And I mentioned that on the Purchasing Division website, there is a list of procurement officers for over 100 state agencies. You may be able to easily identify 5 or 6 agencies out of those 100 that would need your goods and services. And what I recommend as part of this second strategy, when you don't have a specific solicitation opportunity out for bid, is to contact those procurement officers and introduce yourself to them. What I usually tell vendors is to develop a one-page introduction that just describes who you are, where you are, and what you can provide. That's going to do several things for you. Number one, when state agencies are procuring something in that under $50,000 threshold, they're going to know that you're out there for either a verbal bid, a written bid, or, if your average transaction is under $5,000, one of those direct transactions that they have the authority to make. Remember, I mentioned that for a lot of businesses, your average transaction is under $50,000. So this dollar threshold area could be your bread and butter when it comes to competing for state of West Virginia agency business. But agencies aren't going to know to call you for a verbal bid or call you for a quick written bid. They don't know you're out there. In addition, and we hope this is rare as possible, when there's an emergency situation and the agency needs something right away, whether it's remediation, storm damage cleanup, anything where life and property is at risk. If they already know who you are when that disaster strikes, then you put yourself in the realm of possibility of being contacted in those situations as well. The reason why I say just do a one-page introduction to yourself, who you are, where you are, what you can provide, is because we all get a lot of emails. We all get a lot of, cold call information from vendors, and, a one-page something from a vendor is something that's easily digestible by a procurement officer. So hopefully that answers the question that was brought up earlier. There's information on our website that lets you go a little bit deeper. If you are at the stage where you really want to do some extra homework to see and plan what approach you might take to responding to a solicitation, the transparency section at wvpurchasing.gov has 3 major pieces of information. Of course, there's a link to the Bulletin which tells you what the state's trying to buy, but also the Purchasing Division posts all vendor responses after bid openings to the central solicitations that we've administered for the agencies. And then we have reports there that show who was the eventual successful vendor. So what good does it do you to see something that the state's already bought? Well, just about everything that the state agencies need, they're going to need it again. And if you are looking at a current solicitation out for bid and considering whether to respond and how you're going to respond, potentially there's information that benefits you if you look and see how that was procured in the past. Very importantly, what did the competition look like and how much competition was there when you are deciding your price and whether or not it would be worthwhile to respond. So that information is out there for transparency purposes, but for a vendor that really wants to do their homework about an active solicitation, it could be to your advantage if you can find when the state purchased the same thing before. Now, the third and last strategy I'm going to go into are opportunities that exist for you for statewide contracts. What is a statewide contract? I mentioned at the beginning that for a lot of things that the state of West Virginia buys, we use our bulk buying power to harness the lowest price possible. And that's for the most commonly procured commodities and services that we need. Paper, computers, vehicles, fuel. There are certain things that just about every agency in the state's 55 counties is going to need. And what the purchasing division does for a lot of those frequently purchased commodities and services is use the yearly expenditure expectation to leverage one big contract that we call a statewide contract that is then mandatory for use by all state agencies in many cases. So, like in the case of paper or office supplies, if you're the current statewide contract holder for that particular commodity, then all the state agencies in West Virginia would be required to come to you whenever they need that commodity or service. Now, if there's something you can provide in one of these categories, we can't put you on the statewide contract tomorrow. These are bid out yearly or every other year, something like that. A statewide contract is an exclusive agreement with a vendor for a specific period of time. That's the state's promise to the vendor. When you give us the best price possible, that's our way of saying we're only going to come to you for the duration of this contract. Now, from the vendor's perspective, this is a longer term pursuit. However, it could be a high yield opportunity if you are able to provide something that is on one of these statewide contracts and you are the successful vendor for that statewide contract. And if you want to get an idea of the state, I think the last time I counted, there were between 70 and 80 statewide contracts that are active right now. They're listed on our website at the link you see on the screen now. So you can get an idea of all the common commodities and services that we have these often exclusive agreements with the private sector for. And this is what that looks like. And you can see auto parts, light bulbs, office furniture, office supplies. There's just a lot of basic items that we have statewide contract agreements for. It's a longer term pursuit because they only go out for bid every year, every other year, something like that. But if you're the exclusive provider for something for all the agencies in the 55 counties, it could be incredibly advantageous for you. Now at this stage, I'm going to turn you over to our vendor registration coordinator, Tara Oliver, and she's going to talk a little bit about what would be required if you go through any of these strategies and you're the successful vendor for a contract or an order. What would be required for you to receive that contract?
Good morning, I'm Tara Oliver, and I will provide some specific information on vendor registration requirements. As Mark said earlier, this process would not be required until you're about to receive an award from the state. There are two pieces of information we need in order to fully register you with the purchasing division. One half is a disclosure of information about your business. The second half of the registration process is the payment of a $125 annual fee if you're receiving more than $2,500 worth of business from the state. What kind of information do we disclose about your business? This first part of the registration process requires us to collect details such as your legal name, physical address, and federal tax ID number. The vendor registration office at the purchasing division is here to guide you through the details of the state competitive bid process. We know there is a lot to learn about pursuing state business and completing agency requirements. We can be your central source of information to help guide you through registration and introduce you to information on bid opportunities. If you want to schedule a conversation to discuss information tailored for what you do, we are available in different ways to help you one-on-one. You can email us, or if you're near Charleston, you can schedule a time in person, or you can set up a teleconference. Okay, I'm going to shift gears from vendor registration program to the Swam certification program. The Swam certification was created 10 years ago for eligible businesses that qualify for certain designations such as small businesses, women-owned businesses, and minority-owned businesses. This certification is good for 2 years as opposed to vendor registration's 1-year period. How can SWAM certification benefit you? If you are pursuing procurement opportunities with other states or a federal entity that reciprocates West Virginia's certification, there may be a bidding preference for you when you compete in that state. In addition, if you are applying for the equivalent of SWAM certification in another state, it may be required for you to receive West Virginia's SWAM certification before you can apply for the same program outside of your home state. We would be happy to help you in any way if SWAM certification benefits you with any entity. We can provide a letter such as the one pictured or any other documentation needed in order to verify your SWAM certification in West Virginia. If your SWAM certification helps you bring home a state contract, please let us know your success story because it's a win for all of us. Thank you for listening to the details of our programs. Now I'm going to turn the presentation over to Senior Buyer David Pauline so he can go into some specific details of the procurement process.
Thank you, Tara. I appreciate that. Again, my name is David Pauline. I'm Senior Buyer with the Purchasing Division. And today I'm going to continue with the process. We're going to go over the purchasing process. Types of solicitations advertised in the West Virginia Purchasing Bulletin and accessible in VSS. Request for quotation, which is a CRFQ, which, as Mark has spoken about earlier, the C represents centralized purchasing division, or the ARFQ, which is the agency. So ARFQs are solicited by state agencies. Responses may be sent to the agency electronically via the VSS portal. You want to make sure you review the solicitation documents for other methods to submit bids to the agency. The CRFQ, or like we said, the Central Request for Quotation, is solicited through the West Virginia Purchasing Division, and I'll just say Purchasing Division from this point forward. You want to make sure you read and review the instructions to bidders contained within the solicitation documents. The vendor will submit responses for central solicitations to the Purchasing Division electronically through VSS. You may fax it to that fax number listed there. You can mail it or UPS or courier. You can drop it off in person between 8:15 a.m. and 4:30 p.m. Email bids will not be accepted for any solicitation advertised by the state purchasing division. So please keep in mind, will not. We can never accept an email bid. One thing to keep in mind, if you and we'll talk about it a little bit more into the presentation, if you decide to submit your bid via fax, that fax must be received completely. The last page has to be received prior to the deadline. If that last page comes in 1 minute after the deadline, it'll be considered late and be disqualified. So make sure that if you're going to fax it, that you do that. Also, if you go through the VSS process, going through OASIS, make sure that you give yourself time in case there's any kind of technical difficulties getting your bid submitted. Types of solicitation advertised in the Purchasing Bulletin and accessible in VSS, the CRFQ, Again, to obtain copies of the solicitation documents, vendors must download attachments from the West Virginia Oasis.gov. Mark went over that, how you can find those. You also, when you go in and pull that up, that solicitation up, you will see attachments, any attachments that you may need that's pertinent to the bid. You want to print those out as well. Included in attachments are instructions to vendors submitting their bids, terms and conditions, specifications, pricing pages, construction documents, and drawings or maps if applicable. If you have a construction document, it'll also give you directions on how you can obtain those if they're not available as an attachment. You may actually be able to contact the architect or engineer for those drawings. And a lot of times that's for a fee. You want to read the instructions to vendors submitting bids section for information such as mandatory, pre-bid meeting, technical questions deadline, and how to submit them, how to respond to bids, and bid opening date and time. This slide is really important. You guys really need to make sure that when you're reading through your bids, this solicitation package from first page to the last page contains pertinent information and valuable information. If you do not read these, it could cause you to have submit something that's not proper, that's not acceptable, or you omit something. I get calls all the time asking me about, is there a pre-bid? Well, if you read the instructions to bidders, you will see that if there's a mandatory pre-bid meeting, and the key word is mandatory. If there's a pre-bid meeting, you have to attend that. If you do not attend and do not sign the sign-in pages, you can submit your bid, but it won't be considered. Also, we have a technical question deadline. There's a deadline there. If it says it has to be in by October 15th at 10 a.m., then they need to be in, and you need to have those in writing to the buyer that's in charge of the project. Then once those questions are received, there will be an addendum to address those questions and to attach the pre-bid meeting if there was one. And you also, by having your information in there, as Mark explained on your being set up properly for the commodities, you should get another email stating that there's an addendum out there for you for your viewing. One thing you want to keep in mind in like the terms and conditions and other issues of the bid package, you'll see special instructions for bonds. If there's a construction bond or a bid bond required, that bid bond, we will accept a copy of the bid bond, but it must be part of your bid. If you forget to do that, your bid will be disqualified. Contractor's license, you may have to have that. You have to have addendum acknowledgement if there was an addendum. And any special licenses, maybe a electrical certification or HVA certification. Again, it's in your best interest to read the solicitation documents. Vendors who have technical questions must submit them in the writing to the buyer's email address listed on the instructions. And again, that's in your vendor submitting bids. Per West Virginia Code of State Rules, West Virginia 148 CSR 16.6B, the blackout period, communication between the agency and vendor regarding a requisition that has been submitted for advertisement is prohibited. So once the agency puts together their requisition and they hit submit and it comes to me, you're no longer allowed to contact that agency or have any communication with them. If you do so and you guys go back and forth, that could be grounds for canceling that bid and having to restart. All communications should be submitted to the buyer in charge. Now, if there's an agency delegated procurement or solicitation out there, you can communicate with the procurement officer and him alone or her. Once we hit to submit for the solicitation to be published, our purchasing assistant, again, going back to what Mark was saying about the commodity codes, if you have your commodity codes input correctly, when we do the submission, our purchasing assistant will run a report listing all those commodity codes that fall under the solicitation. And they will send out a solicitation notification letter inviting you to bid on that package. So that's another way we try to make sure that everyone gets a version of this solicitation package. One thing to keep in mind, we have this happen quite often, is when you set up your vendor registration, and if you use an individual's email address instead of your company's email address, and that person leaves your company, you may not get those notifications. Correct. So I want to make sure that you have, as Mark said, as many people as possible on there, or you get that updated if that person leaves. So we do have that sometimes. If people call, I didn't get notification. And also when we send out the award, we send it out to the person submitting the bid, or if they didn't have an email address, we'll go to the vendor registration site and look for that contact information. So please make sure you have that taken care of. The types of solicitation advertised by the purchasing bulletin and accessible through VSS. We have best value purchasing. We also have the request for proposal. All CRFPs are solicited by the purchasing division. And one thing to keep in mind on an RFP is we're looking for the highest scoring vendor to award the contract to, or the purchase order. Electronic submissions on this is prohibited. So all these will be, and emails as well. We never accept by email. So the only way we're accepting these bids are by fax, in person. We need hard copies. There'll be a two-part evaluation, your technical, and the technical is open at the time of the bid opening and posted online. You want to make sure that and verify that your technical section of your response contains no pricing. If it does, your bid would likely be disqualified because it would could influence the decision. Then we have the second part of the evaluation is cost to be provided in a separate envelope labeled accordingly, and it'll be opened at a later date. Vendors will be notified by fax when the cost opening date has been scheduled.
Before you get started on the next slide, I have a couple questions, just make sure to repeat it. Are state bid contracts eligible for pass-through to local municipalities?
Are state contracts
Eligible for pass-through to local municipalities?
eligible for pass-through for local municipalities?
This is Mark Totten. I'm not sure what you mean by the definition of pass-through. However, in regard to our statewide contracts and the relationships with city, local, county governments, if there is a municipality or a city in West Virginia that needs something off of our statewide contracts, if the vendor will honor that price for the local government, then absolutely it is possible for local governments to use our statewide contracts. And if that does not answer your question, please let me know.
Yeah, he followed up and said, can a state contract be used by Kanawha County, the city of Charleston, et cetera?
The question, can a statewide contract be used by Kanawha County or the city of Charleston? If the vendor will honor that price, then absolutely.
I think he's asking about any contract, not just the statewide ones.
If in regard to every contract, we have contracts for a lot of things that local governments would not buy. We may need to follow up with you on that, but I if the vendor would honor the price and has the inventory, I don't see why not.
Are janitorial and floor care related contracts, are they treated differently from other purchasing contracts?
Well, we had the janitorial contract set up originally as a statewide contract through Wharf, I believe. I'm not sure how, we're kind of in limbo on that
We can
now,
follow up.
aren't we? We will have to follow up with you for a response directly to that.
Yeah, and I'll add a little bit to what David said. Many of those types of commodities have traditionally been managed by a central nonprofit agency, which is currently held by a vendor called Wharf. And when agencies need things like janitorial, they used to be required to go to one of Wharf's suppliers for janitorial services. Currently, and as of the last legislative session, it is not required that state agencies use the central nonprofit agency or any of its suppliers for any of the commodities and services previously required that they get from Wharf. So as of this moment, it's not required that state agencies go to the central nonprofit for these services. They still can if they want to, but it can also be competitively bid.
There's no other question. We'll continue on with the expression of interest. But we refer to this as an EOI or a CEOI if it's through the central division. These will be for architectural and engineering services. And this is one that's a little different. It's kind of unique to this, to our normal process, is we do not base this on cost. We base it solely on the qualifications and experience of the agents or the vendor itself. We advertise these EOIs, as we call them, in the newspaper for 2 consecutive weeks. And it's also in the purchasing bulletin as well. At the end of the 2 weeks, then we have a normal bid opening where there's no pricing involved. It's not allowed to have pricing in the contract, the bid at all. There will be an agency committee that will review review your qualifications. There will be interview, and you'll be rated on that. The committee, I can speak this morning, will consist of 3 to 5 agency members, which this procurement officer will be one of those. And they're going to score you. It's going to be the highest ranked vendor will get to enter the negotiation period with the agency. And once, if you're able to come to a successful award, we'll award the contract if you agree on the pricing. Reminder, vendors can have no contact with either the state agency or the architectural engineering firm. Types of solicitation advertised in the purchasing bulletin and accessible through VSS are the AEOI, which is the agency expression of interest. It's handled the same way, except it's through the agency. The EOI, expression of interest, again, as we just talked about, it'll be advertised through the purchasing bulletin. It'll also be in the newspaper, and the responses are to be sent either by mail to the address listed on the screen, to the fax number listed on the screen. You can drop it off in person. You can submit it electronically through westvirginiaoasis.gov. Emailed responses, again, are not acceptable. Next, we have a CRFI. This is a request for information. This is used for informational purposes only. And sometimes we see this in a project that the agency really has no idea how to approach it. They may put out that they got a certain project. Nobody in their agency has ever done this or has any information on it. So they're going to list out basic idea of what they need. And they're requesting information from the vendor group to come up with a plan. And you're gonna have, it's gonna be advertised in the purchasing division, the bulletin, and responses are gonna be submitted to the purchasing division by the date listed on the solicitation. Again, you're basically, we know pricing, you're just submitting your idea how to make this project go forward, and they'll develop their specifications and their package from that. Bid submission. Carefully review your bid before submitting to ensure all requirements are met and all documents have been completed correctly. Ensure all documents that require a notary seal have been signed and dated on the same date the notary signed and dated. That's a big issue that we have with failed documents, your bid bonds. Does the date taken and subscribed to must match the date notarized and the date that it was signed? Also, in your bid submission, make sure when you hit submit, if you're doing it through the purchasing bulletin, through Oasis, that you're making sure that all your attachments are there. We get several people call in, my attachments didn't go through, the bid's already opened, what do I do? There's nothing you can do. If the pricing page, you were doing a separate pricing page and that attachment didn't come through, it cannot be considered. If there's specs that were required, something that was required, some references or important documentation, and you didn't submit those attachments, then it's not, you're going to be disqualified. So the Oasis way of doing it is amazing. It helps things out, but just make sure that you have everything submitted and attached. If you don't, you can always resubmit. If you go back and you realize, oh, I forgot to attach this, if you have time, you've allowed yourself enough time to get your bid in again, you can put it back in and state that you want your previous bid to be ignored, that this supersedes. You want to review Section 8 of the Terms and Conditions regarding insurance requirements. The Certificate of Commercial Insurance General Liability is now required on all commodities and services prior to award of any contract awarded through the West Virginia Purchasing Division. Other insurance requirements may apply and will be checked and marked, and they'll also have the dollar amounts that's required. You also want to make sure that on this form, where it says certificate holder, you can put the state of West Virginia or you can put the agency. But if you would, very often, the vendors omit this on their bid, which is okay, we can ask for it later, but if you would make sure that that document's already complete and with your bid package, it just saves something else that we have to get, and it'll help speed along the process of the award. If the bid requires a bid bond, the bid bond must be submitted with the bid. Bid bonds cannot be obtained after the bid opening date and time. And that there's no discussion for this. It just it has to be attached to your bid. It can be a copy. And then you have, I believe it's 1 business day after the bids are opened to have your original to us. Make sure that those dates and the raised seals are on your original bid bond when you send it in. Vendor preference forms must be submitted with the bid. Read section 15 through 16 of the instructions to vendors submitting bids for information on when preference may apply and how to obtain the vendor form. Bid submission. Other documents that should be submitted with the bid and required prior to the award: Addendum Acknowledgment form. If any addendums were issued, you have to have the Addendum Acknowledgment form. You don't have to have it with your bid. I recommend you go ahead and do it. When you have an addendum issued, usually the last page of that will be the Addendum Acknowledgement. If you would just sign that and submit it with your bid, it will be helpful. Licenses, certifications, permits, if noted in section 7 of the general terms and conditions, you may be required to have your contractor's license, HVAC, electrical, any type of permits. Make sure that if you're doing a contractor's license, that it's signed. We get those in quite often, that a contractor forgot to sign, and or that's expired. So make sure you're sending in a current form. The drug-free workplace affidavit will be required with all construction contracts. You can, if you forget to attach it, you can do it after the bid has been submitted, but it has to be in our presence within 1 business day. Subcontractor list, we recommend that that's also submitted with your construction contracts. If you forget, it has to be here in our possession within 1 business day of the bid opening. And this is a page that you'll see for your bid submissions. And it's on the West Virginia Oasis. Again, as I said before, you want to make sure all your attachments, and this is where you would do your attachments. Bid submission. Bid must be received by the scheduled bid date and time of the bid opening listed on the instructions to vendors submitting bids. Vendors must review any addendums attached in the Oasis to stay informed of any bid openings, changes, or other changes to the solicitation. You should, anytime, if you received an email that we have a solicitation out, you should also be receiving the addendum notification. You want to make sure you read that because there may be some questions that were asked and responded to that could affect how you may submit your bid. There could be changes to the specifications and any other requirements. So it's very important that you read any addendum. Late bids will not be considered for award. That's per West Virginia Code 58311G and state rules, Code of State Rules. Bid opening procedures may vary between individual agencies, which are the agency versus central. We don't control how they have their bids. All central purchasing bids, we open at 1:30 p.m. Eastern Time. The agencies set their own times and their own dates. And we try to do our bid openings Monday through Thursday. We try not to do them on Friday unless it's something, an emergency or whatever. Individual agencies develop procedures based on their agency delegated purchasing authority. Review the solicitation documents for information regarding how to submit your bid responses to the agency that has advertised the solicitation. Individual agencies have different bid submission deadlines. As I said before, just make sure that you're following their policies and it should all be in your bid package. For centralized solicitations, responses can be submitted electronically through VSS unless prohibited. Again, you can fax them, paper bids, mailed or dropped off in person. Again, as we said, keep emphasizing this, fax bids are not considered complete until the last page transmits, and it must be here and date and time stamped by 1:30 p.m. Eastern Time. Any bids after that will not be considered. They'll be considered late and disqualified.
We have a question. Someone's asking where they can find the bid details, submission dates, list of bids, which applies to my company, et cetera.
You want a list of the dates when the bids are to be submitted. That was on the earlier presentation. If you go back and look at the slide, it shows it. The bid requirements are always in the package. If you look at the instructions to bidders, it lists the date and time that the bid is to be submitted. It has the date and time that your questions, responses are to be, questions are submitted, tongue-tied. Questions deadline that your questions should be submitted by. And also has your pre-bid, if we're having a pre-bid. All those are kind of like right in order. I hope that answers your question. If not, ask again. We'll see if we can address it more clearly. Following the bid opening, all bids are posted on the purchasing division's website with the address listed there. Most of the time it's that day, but 99% of the time it's within 1 business day, unless we had some issues. It's posted on our website. You can see it right there on the left. It'll say bids received. You can go in and look at that. You'll be able to see every bid that was submitted for that day, and you can actually view those bids. Bid evaluation, all bids are evaluated to ensure that mandatory specifications are met. If the solicitation is advertised by West Virginia Purchasing Division, CRFQ, the CRFP, or the CEOI, state agency that the purchasing division has solicited on behalf of will complete their evaluation and submit a recommendation award to me as a buyer or to the other buyers. Then I would take that bid, their recommendation, and then I would do the same. I will review and make sure that your bid or the winning bid, lowest bid meeting specs, has met all mandatory specifications. If there was something missed, then we'll go back and discuss. It has to be the low bid meeting mandatory specifications. After the purchasing division buyer has reviewed and agrees with the recommendation, a contract will be awarded to the lowest responsible bidder. One thing to keep in mind when you're looking at these, I just had a call from the vendor. I'll give you a little bit of an example that was complaining that somebody else, the low bid actually didn't meet some of the required specifications. When you're reading through these specifications, when you see should, may, those are just highly suggestive. If you see shall, must, or will, there's no question that has to be included or your bid's going to be disqualified. Those are mandatories. So just keep those in mind. I'll say them again: must, shall, and will. Those are not open for discussion. They have to be there. So anytime it is one that says that your bid should be completed in its entirety, or it may be disqualified. Again, it said should and may. It's still a possibility, but if it would have said must and will, then it would be disqualified. Mandatory registration requirements prior to award. Prior to award, vendors must be in good standing with the following, including but not limited to the West Virginia Secretary of State's office, the West Virginia Tax Department, West Virginia Insurance Commission, and the West Virginia Purchasing Division. It can be completed through your West Virginia OASIS. Award for solicitations that have been advertised by West Virginia Purchasing Division. All CRFQs, CRFPs, and CEOIs, all bidders will be notified when the contract has been awarded if an email address has been provided. As I said before, make sure that you have a good email address on your form, or at least in your vendor registration, because what we do now, instead of mailing out copies, we email out a notification or notice of award. And then with that notice of award, you can go to our West Virginia Purchasing Division website, and in the center of the screen, you'll see a brown file folder that says awarded contracts. You can click on that link or that icon, and it'll pull up a listing of all the contracts, and you can search for the CPO or the CMA or the CCT that has been awarded. It'll give you a number, and you can find it there. Please keep in mind, even though you've got a notice of award or notice, you cannot begin any work or commodity delivered until the vendor has received an encumbered contract or coordinated with the agency. Some of our contracts, as far like construction contracts, maintenance contracts, require a notice to proceed. So make sure how that contract is worded, and never start work unless you have spoken to your agency to verify. And also, once you've received an encumbered contract, the blackout period is no longer in effect, and you can contact that agency so that you can begin work. Protest procedures. You have two types of protest procedures, either prior to the bid opening, and you would be protesting the specifications. They must be submitted in writing to the purchasing director at least 5 days before the bid opening. You can protest the award, and this must be submitted in writing to the purchasing director within 5 days after the award of the purchase order. It's the vendor's responsibility to know these dates. Change orders to contracts, renewals, and other modifications to existing contracts may only be executed if renewal language exists in the original contract. When are change orders necessary? Any change to a contract requires a change order. No work shall be performed by the vendor until such time as the vendor receives an approved written change order. Purchasing division will send change order for centralized contracts, and the agency will do for the agency contracts. A change order to renew a contract requires a two-party agreement. So we would definitely need your signature that you're agreeing to the contract to the same terms and conditions if we're renewing a CMA, which is an open-ended contract that you're part of, and you're going to guarantee the same terms and conditions, pricing's the same, and you're agreeing to renew for another year. How is a centralized change order process for a CMA or CPO, master agreement and central purchase order? They're prepared by the agency. They're submitted to the purchasing division for review and approval. We would prepare the change order, go through the signature process. The AG's office has to approve as to form. Once it's encumbered, the work can be started or facilitate the change. Here are key things to remember. As we said before, the purchasing division cannot accept late bids. For formal acquisitions, vendors may not communicate with the state agencies regarding specific solicitations. Questions must be submitted in writing to the purchasing division buyer listed on the solicitation. The blackout period between the agency and the vendor begins when the requisition is submitted until the official award of the contract has been made. Vendors are encouraged to submit all required documentation with the bid to speed up the award process. Review the purchasing and agency master terms and conditions for a good understanding of all requirements. And there's two links there for those for your viewing. It's very important that you communicate any performance or product delay. With COVID, everybody's had issues with the supply chain, and people are understanding, but you need to communicate constantly with your agencies to let them know if there are issues. Lack of communication can cause major headaches. The agency will document the communication made with the vendor and all efforts to resolve the problems. If multiple attempts to resolve the issue have failed, the agency will contact the purchasing division for further guidance and may file a vendor complaint or vendor performance evaluation if necessary. References: doing business with the state of West Virginia. Vendor procurement guide, there's a link for that. Vendor resource center at westvirginiapurchasing.gov, there's your link. West Virginia Purchasing Division OASIS procurement section, there's your link. Transparency, so you can see, as Mark and we both discussed, bids or whatever you may need to see for transparency reasons. The West Virginia OASIS ERP board, there's your link. And then there's the help desk for OASIS. If you're experiencing issues with submitting your bids or receiving addendums or solicitations, you can contact your help desk. And then we also have the doing business with the state of West Virginia procurement guide. You can access that as well. The U.S. Small Business Administration, the mission of the U.S. SBA is to help small businesses start and grow and succeed. The West Virginia District Office is available to serve the state with offices located in Clarksburg and Charleston. Monthly webinar trainings are available. To review the schedule and register for these trainings, visit the link listed on the page. As you can see, the rest of these, that's there for your information. And that's my presentation. Thank you for your time.
Okay, this is Mark Totten. I'm going to wrap it up and bring it home for everybody. hopefully, at both on a high level and in the nitty-gritty that David took us through, there is information here that is going to be beneficial for you, whether you have competed for state business in the past or whether you are just trying to figure out where to start. I hope that you have thought of something that fits into your day and fits your business model, that you can hopefully move forward with and participate in our procurement process. The three strategies that I formalized in this presentation are by no means the only avenues that could lead you to receiving a state contract or a state order. But to me, these are the three most common and most feasible paths. First of all, I cannot overstate the importance of reading the West Virginia Purchasing Bulletin. If you don't know what we're trying to buy, then you can't begin these steps to pursue it. You may not have time to pursue every opportunity, and that's fine. But if you're not aware, you can't make that decision. And, especially in the case of the vendor that asked, how do I tell an agency that they need something that they're not aware they need? That second strategy, which is marketing yourself directly to state agencies, finding a few of the state agencies out of the 100-some that could use your stuff, put together a brief introduction about who you are. Agencies have a lot of flexibility, up to $50,000 with what they can pursue on their own authority. And then remember, within that $50,000 range, there are various levels of formality, verbal bids, written bids, etc. There's a lot of flexibility and a lot of opportunity at the agency delegated level. So please, if that's where you think your most advantageous territory would be, pound the pavement and do that work to make sure the procurement officers know who you are, whether it comes time when they need a verbal bid or if, God forbid, there's an emergency in the state of West Virginia. And remember, the longer term but higher yield opportunity that exists for you are those statewide contracts, which are usually exclusive agreements with a specific vendor for the most frequently purchased materials that we need. So all the different tips and tricks that I went through, not just the bulletin, but the advantages in the vendor self-service portal, programming into your user ID those commodity codes that describe what you do, that will then make you eligible for those email alerts, contact the agencies directly, etc. There's a lot of information there. And then the vendor registration, which is not required until you would be the successful vendor, but is something that you may consider just having up to date anyway. So when the time comes where you are the apparent successful vendor, you would be ready. And then the Swam certification. Remember, there could be a lot of advantages to you in other states or with federal entities in regard to Swam certification if you think you may fall into one of those designations. So please think about the opportunities that are available to you with that program. And here, before we go back to our question and answers, I'm going to turn you over to Tara Oliver, who wants to drop some information at the end of the presentation as a little additive to our webinar today.
Thank you. Yeah, just real fast, in regards to what David had mentioned earlier, as far as keeping your information up to date, that's going to go as far as even the information that you input when first creating the account. For instance, it asks you to create a user ID, password, it asks for your email and your phone number. Your email and your phone number, you want to always keep up to date, for the fact that if you accidentally input that password in incorrectly too many times, your account's going to get logged. You're going to have to call the Oasis Help Desk, have that account unlocked, and have a password reset. They will confirm your account also based on the phone number that you're calling from. So if you're out of office and you're calling off of a cell phone and it does not match the phone number that you inputted when you were registering, they're not going to be able to finish the process. So always keep that up to date, especially If it does come to the time when you're trying to submit a bid and you're not able to get logged in and you have to call it and that number's not up to date, that's going to be a problem. So always keep that information up to date as well.
Okay, we do have a couple of questions that have come in, that hopefully we can, if we don't have time to answer them all, we will, follow up with you individually. The first one is, does the CRQF form and solicitation documents always need turned in with your bid? And David will pop over here to answer that. Does the CRQF form and solicitation documents always need turned in with your bid?
No. Just the pages that it states that are required. It's always helpful if you send in all the documents. Sometimes more is better, that way you don't miss anything, but you're not required to send in the original CRFQ or even the terms and conditions.
Okay. Let's see, there was another one. Mark, are the UN commodity codes also used for services like HR and payroll?
Okay, regarding the commodity code system the state of West Virginia uses, are they also used for things like HR and payroll? The answer is yes. I know there's different, it's kind of like a Dewey Decimal System, right? But the state of West Virginia exclusively uses the UNSPSC Commodity Code Library from the United Nations. So it's that library of codes from the United Nations is going to cover everything from steel to IT to automobiles to things like HR, et cetera. Everything that the state of West Virginia is buying, that is the only commodity code system we're going to use to classify it.
We do have a question about how to register for Swam certification, but I'll have Mark and Tara reach out to you following the webinar. Back when we were talking about the janitorial contract, someone asked for some clarification. On slide 17, we had that it's mandatory for all state agencies to purchase through a statewide contract if those goods or services are offered through an active agreement. And then we started talking about Wharf Jan. So this vendor just wanted some clarification. So is this correct? He was really asking if this if this bullet point is correct. Okay.
Well,
So we need to update that.
well, I would actually say it's both correct. And David may also, you come in here. There was actually specific legislation this past session that made the commodities and services previously mandatory through the central nonprofit WARF. So where there was previously a statewide contract for janitorial statewide, you don't necessarily have that anymore. It's in the process of becoming competitive. In fact, it already is competitive. So what was previously, where there was previously a statewide contract for janitorial, the way I would describe it is there's not anymore. Agencies currently, under current legislation, agencies now have the freedom to pursue janitorial services or any other commodity that was previously mandatory through the central nonprofit WARF. They can pursue that on their own.
Also, there's on the statewide contracts, you'll look, if you go in there and look at some of those, you'll see that they're not mandatory. There's a handful that are listed. I think office supplies is one, but I'm not going to go into detail on that. You can see it for yourself. But just because it says it's not mandatory doesn't mean that the agencies don't have to, they still may use it because that way they don't have to go out to bid and save some time. But they do have that option now, if it's not mandatory, that they can go off that bid.
Okay, that looks like, I think that we got to all of the questions that came in during the webinar. So, well, except if there were any that we missed, or that were just sent to Mark and not myself, then we will reach out to you individually and make sure that all of your questions are answered. And if you think of something later, their contact information is there on the screen. Feel free to reach out. So we don't want to take any more of your valuable time today, but we really appreciate your participation and hope you have a great rest of the day. Thank you.